The 1619 Project is an ongoing narrative first published in the New York Times last August, marking the 400th anniversary of the arrival of African slaves to the colony of Virginia. It aims to reframe history by placing the consequences of slavery as the center of America's legacy. As project director Nicole Hannah-Jones put it, the fight here is about who gets to control the national narrative and therefore the nation's shared memory of itself. Jones goes on to say the 1619 Project never pretended to be history, which begs the question as to why it has been packaged as a curriculum for K through 12 students, with many school districts planning to adopt it. Among its claims are the idea that the American Revolution was launched in order to ensure slavery would continue, and that modern American capitalism has its roots in plantation slavery. Robert Woodson, founder of the Woodson Center, an organization that seeks to strengthen and uplift Black communities, strongly disagrees with the goals of the 1619 Project, saying it hurts Black Americans by casting them as perpetual victims while ignoring Black America's long history of success and achievement.
Well, Bob Woodson, founder of the Woodson Center, joins us now by Skype. And Bob, what are the ways that Black Americans are being hurt by the 1619 Project narrative?
Well, what is happening is that a group of Blacks have gotten together and they have hijacked the rich legacy of the civil rights movement by demeaning, assuming that America is defined by race. Well, we have, since they are using the Black issue, we have organized Black scholars and activists all over the country to push back against this false narrative. We're not doing so by offering a counter debate. We're offering a counter narrative, an inspirational and aspirational alternative. We're developing curriculum K through 12 that celebrates America. It recognizes that America's birth defect was slavery, but America is defined by its promise. And so we are celebrating it, how Blacks achieved in the face of oppression. We're telling success stories. We're telling the real story of America. Black and brown people are risking their lives to come to this country. And so we are going to be celebrating our rich legacy and showing America that they don't speak for Black America, that we believe in this nation.
Well, Bob, what happens with individuals when they're taught to see all of American history through the lens of slavery and oppression?
It really, Pat, what they're saying is that that Black America's history is just from slave ships to plantations to the ghetto. Some of our scholars looked at the records of 6 major plantations at the end of slavery. They found that 75% of the families were living with a mother and a father raising children. In other words, for a whole century, Black America, even in the face of oppression, the family thrived up until 1965. In fact, Pat, between 1930 and 1940, when racism was enshrined in law, Black Americans had the highest marriage rate of any other group in society. And that is, and elderly people could walk safely in their community, unlike today. And that's because of our Christian faith and the importance of the nuclear family. We prevailed. We closed the education gap between 1920 and 1940 because we had Christian schools, the Rosenwald Booker T schools, 5,000 of them. So all of this rich history of perseverance, of achieving against the odd, is totally ignored by 1619 because it doesn't fit the victim's narrative that they're trying to paint for Black America.
Bob, what happened when a law was passed which guaranteed certain income and stuff? What has that done to the nuclear family among the Black community?
Pat, up until from 1865, at the end of slavery until 1965, the Black nuclear family was intact. But that has changed since 65 with the advent of the poverty programs, removing the stigma of welfare, the federal government, what the social scientists, the socialists at Cloud and Piven at the Columbia University School of Social. They said if we can separate work from income, it will make the man irrelevant, and also it'll create a situation where it will bankrupt the nation and force America to redistribute income. And as a consequence of this intervention, the out of wedlock births has soared so that 70% of all children are born in single parent households. But Pat, this is a phenomenon that was caused by the progressive social policies of the 60s. It had nothing to do with institutional racism. It had everything to do with corrupt, corrosive policies of the 60s. And unfortunately, those civil rights leaders have turned the civil rights movement into a race grievance industry. And they are the ones who, as mayors, and have spent $22 trillion on programs to aid the poor, where 70 cents of every dollar goes to those who serve the poor and not those who are solving problems.
How are we going to turn this around? Because, as you said, the nuclear family, a husband and a wife and children living together is the surest cure against poverty. How are we going to get that back again?
Well, right now, if you say that 70% of those families are raising children that are dysfunctional, it means that 30% are not, Pat. So what the Woodson Center is doing in 1776, we go into those communities and ask among the 30%, how did you achieve against the odds? And how can we learn and take what you have done and share it with the 70%? We have examples, for instance, in a public housing project in D.C., where people began to apply these old values to a new vision, and young people became remoralized. And from one public housing project, 70% of the children went on to college and lived responsible lives. So it's not the end if you start your life in some of these dysfunctional households. It's possible to regenerate, to become remoralized and rebuild. The Woodson Center has demonstrated that we have models for how it happens. We know the principles of restoration and redemption. We just have to invest in them as an alternative to what 1619 is preaching.
Well, you pointed out, among other things, that I think is very important, that the largest portion of this anti-poverty money goes to the people who are dealing with the program. I mean, they're enriching themselves. We use the term poverty pimps, but that's what they're doing. What are you doing against that?
Well, first of all, we are saying to American corporations, stop sending checks to Black Lives Matter. They're doing it by the millions. And the very fact that in the demonstrations and violence in Oregon, they recently burned the American flag and they burned Bibles. So any pretense that they are doing this to promote social justice for blacks is just not true. This is an assault on civic institutions. This is an anarchist pushing against and trying to destroy our nation. And so it is important for private investors to invest in those institutions within those black communities that are struggling to regenerate within. And so that's what we are doing at the Woodson Center, providing models for how regeneration of these communities can occur. Pat, the best-selling book in Amazon in the socialist section is Communism for Kids.
Communism for kids.
Communism for kids.
Well, Bob,
we are providing alternatives.
Bob Woodson, I thank you so much. What a great work you're doing. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to talk to you again. Black Lives Matter, the three women who started Black Lives Matter, two of them were avowed Marxist socialists, and they were trained. They bragged on the fact they'd been trained as revolutionaries. It has nothing to do with helping black people. It has to do with bringing in a socialist agenda into America. Antifa is something that came out of Germany, and but this 1619 project, I want to tell you, we live here close to 1607, and those early people who came to the shores of Virginia Beach were not out having to do with racism. They were here, and they planted a cross, and they said, we want to start a land where we can be free to worship God. The same thing is true in 1620 when they were up in New England and the Plymouth Rock. They were people who were fleeing religious persecution, and it had nothing whatsoever to do with slavery. It had to do with, we want to be free people, we want to be free to worship God, and we want to be free of state churches that have imprisoned us and oppressed us. That's what it was all about, and to change that narrative. But as the leader of the 1619 Project, he said, we know it's not history. We admit it's not history. It's a question of who controls the narrative. And it's time we take the narrative back. And I tell you, Robert Woodson and his group are doing a tremendous job.